Well, we're working on the Trans Am today. So before the engine goes back into the Trans Am, there were situations that the owner wasn't happy with. And one was when we had the cover off and looking for leaks and stuff, trying to see if it was leaking back at the rear main seal. You could see this thing actually wobbling, like there was runout in it. And we have a brand new Hughes torque converter, and we put this stock Flexplate on here. And as we took it off, he marked it. And if you ever work on a Pontiac engine, and then all of a sudden you've torn it apart, and then you're putting it back together, you can see that these have flanges that are stamped and they come out, and this faces outward. This is the engine side. So this was marked here, and somebody else had marked it there once before, and you can see this raised area when this is stamped out that's giving a little bit of clearance. And just like what we did when we were working on the Javelin, you got to check for all these clearances, and this steps it away now so it's not rubbing against the torque converter. And we'll line up, this is where it would be bolted up. This is the stock one. Okay. So then, if this is stamped that way, here's a new one made by this company, PRW. It's made out of chrome alloy steel. SFI approved. Wanted it stronger. We weighed these, and this one's actually heavier. Different people have different thoughts on reciprocating weight. This is going to be for a street vehicle. Now, let's say if you had two engines that were exactly the same, one had shaved down counterweights on an engine, it's going to wind up faster. And all the, like a flywheel, you can get a heavy flywheel if you're going to have slicks and it's going to have to really carry the load. You don't want it bogging on its face. And then between gears, as it's shifting, and the heavier flywheel is going to have more rotating mass. And you got your pros and cons depending on what type of engine you have. And let's see, you got a little 4-cylinder or a small 283. You'd need a flywheel that has some weight to it to get it off the line. Whereas when you got a big, strong engine, you can get by with a lightweight, aluminum flywheel. And they've got so much torque already, you got to worry about breaking the tires loose. 6.2, what is that? 5.2, so it's 1 pound. Okay, so this is another thing, just like if you followed us with the Javelin, we've got this lined up with the holes, and you got to make sure you're not, like ours was ending up, the heads were digging into the torque converter. I'm going to check this snout, see that it fits in the back of the crankshaft on the engine, and it's not touching. It's not going to wear on the torque converter, and it's sitting flush, it's not wobbling. So now we're going to get to the point of mounting this on the back of the crankshaft, but in order to do that we have to lift it off of the engine stand. That's another thing we're going to be doing. We want to verify, and he counted them, they have the exact same amount of teeth. We have a mini starter now because there's headers and it's a pain in the butt with a full-size starter to work around those constraints. So we're going to show how you can set the torque or the starter up and get the clearance between the gears just right so you won't have a problem later on when you're starting. It's going or ring. There's two different ways that it can go. So if you get it set up just right, we won't have a problem later on. He's just not totally happy with the way this looks like it's welded, but welding with chrome alloy steel,
flip it over.
Sometimes people have, like these are like little bird turds rolled on top, but Maybe they didn't want to use too much heat. Then take the hardness off the gear. I'm sure they're professionals, they know what they're doing. Hopefully. When it came to the torque converter, we went back to our friends at Hughes and described what we had, and they made a fully furnace brazed, fins on this. It's going to be overkill for this street car, and it should engage at about 2,000 RPM. So any Pontiac guru would probably recognize these, or if you work on GM, this is the stock bolt that holds the flex plate to the back of the crankshaft. It's got a bunch of serrations, grade 8. And then ARP is our friend, because if you want to sleep at night and you want to have the best strength possible, ARP makes their bolts stronger than grade 8. More clearance, and you ain't going to pull these threads apart. In order to even work on this, we have to take this whole thing off the back. It just does not fit up in here because you got these bolts in the way. So we're going to have to lift it off, take the weight off until this will slide out, put our flex plate on, put it back on. I am just checking to see if there's any raised areas or getting paint off that, we want this perfectly flat. When you use ARP bolts, you got to follow their instructions precisely, and then you'll get the best performance out of your expensive bolts. So when it says do not use washers under these, it's already got a washer head built into it. If you ended up putting another washer underneath it, when you went to go put this on, the head of the bolt would be getting too close to the torque converter, and you'd be wasting some of your thread. So when we put these on, you got to put a Loctite that they recommend on here, and then there's a assembly lubricant that goes underneath the washer, so as you're torquing it, there's no friction on here, and you get the real torque into that bolt, not taking into effect the drag of a dry washer head on this steel. So the way these finished holes are, if it was just punched out and it was really a sharp 90, you might end up having a problem up near at the top, but these are fine. These are, as they're stamped, you can tell they're kind of rolled. This one is balanced, not fully internally. This has some weights that had to be drilled out of it right here, and there's no weight on the front harmonic balance. So this one had to be matched with these holes right here. And then we're going to go in the back, and you're going to see how this only bolts up one way, and it bolts up that way. Now if I turn this, and then this would match up with all the balancing on the throws of the crankshaft. So if I turn it, it doesn't match the holes decently any other way. They're a little bit off. But if I go all the way back around, that's where these holes need to be. So we can make sure that this engine is going to be balanced like the other one. We put a mark and the holes line up. So these end up being in the same location.
So Moly lube on the washer surface, we realized we could have just put that on the flex plate instead. And then we got Loctite on the threads.
Well, it's all torqued on. As you're doing it, the motor's going to want to turn over. So the proper tool to have would be a spanner that fits into a tooth, and one guy would be holding it. Put the torque converter flush to the flex plate and see what the engagement of the hub on the back of the torque converter is to the back of the crank. It's going in, I'd say 1/4 of an inch.
We're getting ready to fit the starter. Make sure all mounting surfaces are 100% bare metal. We're going to pre-shim the starter before installing the engine in the car, so we're not struggling with exhaust and things like that. And if you recall, the starter we took off of here had like probably more than a 1/4 inch worth of shim on it. They're calling this an Infi-clock design. So apparently you can loosen these bolts and rotate this whatever direction you want. We just screwed it on, and it looks like there should be a 1/16 of an inch between the starter pinion gear and the Flexplate ring gear. We got that. We just put it in the position that we bought it in. Seems to fit pretty good. Might have to make an adjustment later. At that distance we're too small. They give us a little shim you could put in there and then step that starter back some. We're taking out the plugs now. We're going to check that distance in probably 3 different locations on this Flexplate, in case there's any run out on the Flexplate.
So it's a lot easier to crank over with the plugs out.
PRW instructions say that they do check for a run out on their Flexplates before they ship them.
We're gonna back off on these bolts and then just stick these in here.
So we're checking this distance here, distance between a ring gear tooth and the valley of the pinion gear. PRW and the Power Master starter instructions are a little bit different. PRW is calling for 35 to 65, and Power Master is calling for 20 to 35. I think we're going to strive to get 35 right there.
You could use welding wire from the MIG gun.
We got a paper clip here, but
40 thousandths. Let's see what this is. 72 thousandths. Still too big right here.
so maybe we'll try taking our 2 shims out.
We'll take one out.
We take one, we'll recheck. We got plenty of clearance with this 040 wire, and that's with no shim. We're going to rotate the crank here to see if this pops out. Testing it here, he's going to roll it over a little bit, as if the engine were running, and you'll see that gear kick out.
Yeah, once you release the electrical power, then she'll let it kick back in with the motor spinning.
I don't think it sounds too bad. I think we're going to run it with no shim.
I think it was a guy that had a problem. Look at that. We got that one on already, but we should have just looked at what was going on before we did this one. That's ridiculous. It's got a bearing support, which is nice.